In the run-up to our regional food system conference, which is coming up on the 5th and 6th of October, I'm really privileged to have a few minutes to chat to Patrick Holden, who's the founder of the Sustainable Food Trust and a dairy farmer, and a real expert on the problems with our food system and what we need to do to make change happen. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
No problem at all. I'm sorry I'm joining you from a car in Glasgow. But quite appropriate, really, since it's going to be the host of COP26 shortly, and I'll be up here again for that. But yes, I've got a farm, 300 acres, West Wales. Been there for a long time, 48 years. We've got a herd of Ayrshire cows, and we make all their milk into cheese, and we're doing our best to farm in a sustainable way.
I've heard you say before that people's image of farming is a complete fantasy. What do you mean by that?
I think what is certainly true is that for most people these days who grow up in cities, they don't know much about the story behind their food. And I think that segregation between the majority of the world's population now who live in cities and the primary food producers is problematic, because the farming systems we have at the moment, which produce the majority of the food we eat, especially if we buy food in supermarkets, is actually not a good story. No fault of the farmers. It's bad for the planet, and it's bad for public health, and it's bad for food security, and it's bad for nature. So we really need to do something about that, because we're in a situation where we're almost in the last chance saloon on climate change, on biodiversity loss, and the industrial farming systems which predominate today are really causing harm. So who can change that? Well, it's us. You know, individual citizens are the most powerful agent of change in the world, not governments, because they always follow, they never lead. And so we are the powerful ones. If we change what the food we buy with a better story, we do that in the numbers that are needed now, we can transform our food systems. And I think that's particularly possible in Wales, because Wales is more intimately connected with its agriculture, but it still has big problems. If you look at the southern corridor, the M4 corridor of Wales, where most of the population live, there's a massive separation going on there. And let's be honest, public health's not that good. And if you go into a supermarket in South Wales and you look for genuinely sustainably produced Welsh produce, very hard to find, very hard. We've got to do something about that.
I'm really interested when you say that we as citizens, as people, are an agent for change, because, you know, the food system feels so vast, and climate change feels like such an enormous problem, and, you know, we as individuals feel so small and powerless, and the changes that we can make often don't feel significant enough when faced with those challenges. And as you say, buying local is not easy, and it's not necessarily affordable. What would you love to see people and communities doing?
I think in order to take the right action, you need to feel that your food purchasing matters. And I think the way to think about this is to think about the global food system as like an enormous organism, vast in scale, obviously, but then think about it being like an organism, and then think of the cell. And the cell of the food system is the farm, or even at a smaller level, the individual citizen. We are, and if the cell is healthy, then the organism as a whole is healthy. At the moment, the organism is sick. Public health is being negatively affected by industrial agriculture, not just the food we eat, but also the environment that farming has created. So the patient Earth is sick. We are the expression of that sickness, public health levels declining. But equally, although things are bad at the moment, individual citizen power is incredibly potent, because enough of us change the story of the food we are buying, buy exclusively, or as much as we can, from local producers farming in a sustainable way. That scaled up is the transformation that is needed. So I think what we need is to mobilize this amazing kind of sleeping giant of individual citizen power, And how do we do that? Well, through education programs starting in schools. We need every school in Wales to adopt a farm or maybe farms, and splice that right into the heart of the education system. But we mustn't assume that we have to wait for the next generation to make the change that's needed. We need to start with ourselves. And I think a good little exercise is to go to your fridge or your food cupboard and look at the staple foods, the foods that could be produced in Wales. This is a lot of food, actually. It's not just lamb and beef, which is really important, grass-fed, but it's also all the vegetables and the grains, and the fresh dairy and the eggs and all the things that we could perfectly well produce in Wales and consume ourselves, and see if we can find any in our fridge. And guaranteed, you either won't know where food comes from, or if you do, it probably won't be from Wales. Well, that's up to us to change, isn't it? So if you are shopping in a particular supermarket, if you do shop in a supermarket or wherever you shop, it doesn't matter, take yourself into that shop and say, look, I want to buy Welsh sustainably produced beef, lamb. I want to put in a word for beef and lamb, because grass-fed ruminants are actually part of the solution, not the problem, as everybody thinks in this climate change debate, but also vegetables and everything else. And if they won't offer you that, take your custom elsewhere. Because if enough of us do that, they will change what they sell. And just to give an example, no offense intended, we do sell rather reassuringly expensive cheese from our farm, Havard Cheese. Follow us on Instagram, by the way. But the thing is, no Welsh supermarkets sell it. And you could say, well, why is that? Even Waitrose, posh Waitrose, they don't sell Havard. And I think it's not that I mind particularly, because after COVID, we've got a terrible shortage of cheese at the moment. It's not as if we're looking for, we don't need to sell more cheese. I'm making this point because I just think it's interesting and rather worrying that no Welsh supermarket chooses to sell a cheese that's one of the only raw milk cheddars produced in Wales. And they don't, probably for various reasons. It's a hassle, it's a bit expensive, this, that, and the other. But crucially, there aren't enough of their customers asking for it. So I do think if we don't ask for the food that we want, it won't happen.
So mobilising citizens and consumers to demand more local produce, do you think it's realistic to think that we could create alternative infrastructure to the supermarkets through regional or localised distribution? And do you see that happening?
It's the same answer, really, in a way. I think we must create regional and local infrastructure. And, I know people don't like to talk about abattoirs, but think about this. You can't have local meat unless you have local abattoirs. And during my farming lifetime, there's been more than a 90% decline in the number of abattoirs throughout the UK, and probably the world, actually, but certainly in Wales. We're still lucky enough to have an abattoir 6 miles away from our farm in Tregaron. But the demand for their services has been overwhelming in the kind of post-COVID period. And meanwhile, most of the supermarkets have a policy of only having one or two massive industrial abattoirs to kill all their beef or their lamb or whatever. And I don't think that's the right way for an animal to end its life. And I also think that one of the reasons why so many people are thinking about going vegan is because they instinctively hate the idea of animals ending their life after traveling hundreds of miles to an industrial abattoir. So I think we must reverse this. Abattoirs, small cheese-making operations, dairy processing, vegetable pack houses, that's crucial. And also places to turn farm animals into mince or, stuff that schools want to buy. We need all that infrastructure to come back, but it won't come back unless there's a demand. So this is where, all the councils, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion, all the councils who have an opportunity to change their public procurement, the public meals on a plate, the schools, the hospitals, the care homes, everything else, they all need to say, they have to have policies. We will only source our staples from farmers in Wales. I mean, come on, that's what's got to happen. And for the political will to exist, it requires us to tell them that's what we want.
Education, people power, procurement, massive lever, as you say, reinvesting in the infrastructure that's needed for local food production and processing. Do farmers see themselves as part of the solution? What's the gap between what farmers are currently doing and where they need to be, and how do we stop it being a kind of them and us debate and work with farms and farmers to reimagine the food system. You call it an industrialized farming system. Do farmers recognize that?
More and more farmers feel disempowered by the systems they're in, because we, the farming community, have become commodity slaves. We never name the price, we just take the price that's on offer. And, you know, if you're a sheep producer in Wales, the prices haven't been bad this year. But basically, we're at the mercy of the market. We have no relationship with our final customer. We probably don't even know if we're beef or lamb producers, where our meat is going. And we're depressed, we're dispirited, and we're just hanging in there, just about making a living. And if you're a dairy farm, you have to have more and more cows, which I think is against the interests of everyone, and especially the cows that are permanently housed, which now provide more than half the milk that we drink. Did you know that? It's just not right. And you can't blame the farmers for that. So again, we've got to change that, saying this isn't acceptable. And farmers, I think, the vast majority of farmers, if you said to them, you can make as much money if you farm in harmony with nature, reduce your stocking rate, don't use so much nitrogen fertilizer, all that kind of stuff, most farmers would change. I mean, why wouldn't you, as long as you can make the same amount of money? So it's really a dispiriting story at the moment, but I think there's change afoot. So we've got to build on that.
I'm sure there is change afoot, and not all that change is in a great direction. When you look at the UK trade deal with Australia, have you got any thoughts on that, about how that will affect what meat we eat?
Yes, I think it was a sort of grubby and depressing trade deal. And I think that an alternative kind of system for future trade deals should be, and this is one of the wonderful things about Wales, the Welsh Government Agricultural Policy Team are in the final stages of developing a sustainable farming scheme, which will replace the old single farm payment that farmers get, this kind of social security check every year. And they want it to be conditional upon entry to the new scheme to have an annual sustainability audit, which would capture the impact of their farming system on soil, on obviously greenhouse gas emissions, on biodiversity, on the social and cultural impacts, everything. And imagine a world where every farmer was having an annual sustainability audit using the same framework of categories and units of measurement. Then you could go to the WTO, or indeed the British government, and say, right, let's do a trade deal with, whether it's New Zealand or Canada or anywhere else. Let's say you can be tariff free if you produce to high sustainability standards. No, so you can just have a free trade situation of regeneratively produced food. But if you're causing damage in America or wherever it is from your production system, then you'll have to pay a tariff, which is the cost to the environment monetized of the damage done. You can only do that if you've got an international language for measuring farm sustainability. But that's what my organization, the Sustainable Food Trust, has been working on for the last 5 years or so. And we are going to be at the COP26 here in Glasgow, promoting that idea. And I was just with somebody from Number 10, the communications person from Number 10 last week, and we also had a meeting with George Eustace, and we were saying to him, George, you know, Britain could be famous for leading this at the COP26. Will it happen? I don't know, but it might.
Yes, and with so many of these things, finding a consistent way of measuring and reporting is really key to making progress. So before we wrap up, Patrick, and really grateful for your time and insight, why do you think people should come to our regional food conference, and why do you think these sorts of conversations are important?
Because your health and the health of the farms in Wales are key to the future of a sustainable living on planet Earth. There is nothing more important than the farming systems of the future, because we depend upon the farms that support us for our food, for our biodiversity, to keep emissions down, and actually to live a civilized health and well-being promoting life. And of course, we've got the health, the Well-being of Future Generations Act in Wales. So come to the conference, because you will, by coming to the event, be part of the future that we need to co-create.
Thank you so much for your time and your interest in what we're doing, and we hope you'll be involved in the event itself as well. But I won't take up any more of your time this morning. I'm so grateful, Patrick. Thank you for talking to me.
Great to speak with you.
We'll keep in touch. Bye. For now.